show you in public right now. You're gonna come take them away. I like your cinnamon one.
Thanks.
You want to intro?
5, 4, 3, 2,
He's already
1.
bored.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hey everybody, welcome back to Bible Fun with the Duns. We want to wish you a very happy Holy Week. Today we're starting out reading in Mark chapter number 12. Now remember, as we start out in this chapter, everything after the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem, everything is headed to the cross. So everything now is conflict and trouble and wrap-ups and setups. Everything is pushing us toward the cross. Now, one of the things you need to recognize is that whenever you're reading through the book of Mark, one of Mark's most favorite words in the whole book is the word immediately. So sometimes go back and read Mark chapter 1 and just start reading till about this point. Everything he says, he'll say, and immediately this happened. So Mark is blazing through this entire story. When you read Mark chapter 1, I saw him jump up and lick you. When you read Mark chapter 1, like by the end of Mark 1, Jesus has already called his disciples. He's already begun his ministry. That's just in chapter 1. All right, Luke chapter 1, Jesus is not even born yet,
right.
Okay? So Mark chapter 1, Jesus has already started his ministry and has his apostles. He blazes through this story using this word immediately to get through. But when he gets to the last week of Jesus' life, it's like he hits the brakes and everything stops. Why? So that we can get a purposeful journey toward this cross. Now, Jen, what was your takeaway from this chapter?
Well, I just see us flying through this. I see everything pointing to Jesus. We have the parable of the vineyard owner, which is really not so much about the vineyard owner. We see people testing Jesus, people on his heels, constantly wanting to know about the authority he speaks from. They're trying to trap him. They're looking for ways to get him in trouble and get him arrested because he is a threat to them and to their power and to the control that they have. I think my biggest takeaway is I can't help but think of Jesus. He's sovereign. He is God, and he knows exactly what's going to happen. He knows what they need to know. And so these last words of his, I mean, honestly, his whole ministry, when he's sharing, we need to cling to every word because it's not that much time, and also because he knows all this then. But these are the last words, and this is where we see stories repeated. We see things that he said in the past, he's repeating them. And remember, like, that's the super bunch of exclamation marks, like, pay attention to this. This is the highlight. This is the italics, the bold words. And so what I see is, I'm not going to put you down. What I see is things that we have seen since the very beginning, since the law. And it's talking about how it is to follow Christ. And so what I see in verse 29 of this chapter is we see a bunch of religious people, a bunch of people who are supposed to be really well versed in scripture, who study it and spend their days writing it over and over again. They should know it backwards and forwards. And it's almost like they know too much. They have dug so deeply that they are forgetting the main point. They're forgetting the bigger picture. And Jesus in verse 29 reminds them, listen, Israel, Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. And then the second greatest command is to love your neighbor as yourself. We tend to complicate things. We tend to say, oh, Jesus said this, but what about this situation? Or let me break it down and make it more complicated. Everything that we're seeing Jesus do, we get to the widow's mite, and I wanted to share, I have a little widow's mite that was one of my souvenirs from Israel one time, and I don't know if you can tell, but it's like actually the inner circle because it's in a little thing where I can put it on my charm bracelet. We see God looking at motive. We see God looking at heart. And if these people really want to follow Jesus, and I'm thinking Jesus is like, what do I need to leave them with? What's the most important stuff to remind them of? This is it. Love God, love people. And if we do that, our hearts will stay right. If we're seeking to love God, the overflow of how we live, we'll keep the commandments. We'll keep the law. We don't even have to worry about counting how many steps we take on a certain day. We don't have to worry about if we think this is too far past the line of what is good and what is evil. If we are pursuing to love God and to love others, the overflow of our heart will be obedience to God. We'll be following closely. It will be holiness.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Now, here's what I want to do. I want to kind of wrap up our time. There's a lot that goes into this chapter. I want to just focus on like the big picture of the very beginning. He does not want to be put down. He wants to be on camera.
And he's really heavy.
He's weird.
And he's scheduled for a haircut, but we're like a couple weeks out.
Golly, it's bad too.
We do love him. We try to take care of him.
Just see your friends. Okay, thank you. All right, so look at the parable of the wicked vine dressers up front. Now listen, this chapter, really this whole moment is based around authority. So the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the priests, the religious leaders, they want to know, because they keep targeting Jesus with this question: who gave you the authority? Now listen, anytime you have somebody going, who gave you the authority to do this? They're usually the ones who think that they have the authority. And they're not mad that you have the authority. They're mad that you have authority that they really think they have. Okay? So who gave you this kind of authority? And so Jesus tells the story of the wicked vine dressers. So here's the story. So a wealthy man planted a vineyard. He set it all up, and then he leaves it in the care of other people. Okay? He goes to a faraway country, and when he goes to a faraway country, he keeps sending messengers back to these guys asking for produce of the land. Now let me take this and let me simplify it. Take this same parable. Because remember, a parable is an earthly story that's got a higher heavenly meaning. Take this story and rewind the story all the way back to the creation of the world. What if Genesis is the story of God planting a vineyard, planting and creating a world, leaving it to people, but having expectations for those people, and those people living as if they didn't want to give God anything? And when he sent his son to finally check on him, they killed him. That's the big picture. Then take the story of the promised land. So God is taking his people that he has called out, that he has redeemed out of Egyptian slavery, and he puts them inside a promised land, and he lets them live in this promised land with commandments they're supposed to keep. And he keeps sending prophets and prophets and prophets to them to call them back. But listen, they don't want to have any of it. And so they start beating and hurting and rejecting these prophets. And eventually they just reject God altogether. And they go into captivity. This is the story. This parable is the over and over again story of God and how people want what God made, and people want authority over it. In verses 3 through 5, it talks about them beating these servants and sending them away empty-handed. These are vivid descriptions of how the Israel's leaders had abused God's prophets in the past. And then when we get to this story, notice he sends 3 rounds of servants, and then he sends his son on the 4th round. Okay? So they've rejected the servant, then they've beaten them, then they've killed them, and now he's sending his son. I want you to understand how very powerful and how much of a genius Jesus is of how he layers in these parables. Because when you read the Old Testament law, the book of Leviticus, it's about Leviticus chapter number 19. Leviticus has a law. And it tells the people that when they get into the promised land, that the land would begin to produce fruit. And so for 3 years, there's going to be fruit produced, but they shouldn't really count on it yet. On the 4th year, when that land produces fruit, Leviticus 19:24 says this: "But in the 4th year, all its fruit shall be holy, and of praise to the Lord. So now when you're reading the story of a father, a builder, a vineyard owner who is building a vineyard and leasing it out to people, and he sends not one, not two, not three, but four. The fourth round is his son. This is fulfilling law. And what happens in this story, this is the story of God not getting what is his because mankind thought that it was under his control. Now here's the deal. The reason why this parable seems to be so important is because in order for a vineyard owner in the Bible to retain the legal rights to property, the owner of that property had to receive produce from that property, even if it was just grown up in the weeds. He had to symbolically get something from the property to retain ownership. This is why in this story, they didn't want to give the owner anything because they wanted control of the property. In verse number 6, this is a vivid story of John 3:16. Verse 6 says, therefore having one son, his beloved, he also sent them to him at last, saying, surely they will respect my son. That's Jesus' John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten son, that whoever would believe in him would never perish, but have everlasting lives. And as these scribes and Pharisees and all these guys who thought they had authority, as they're listening to this parable, they hate Jesus for it. Because Jesus is telling them where their hatred of him is pushing them. Verse 7, it says, but those vine dressers said among themselves, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. So Jesus is talking to the priests, and these are the ones so concerned about authority that their authority, their desire, their craving for authority is pushing them for a control. And this parable is a warning about what their love for power is going to do to them. That they are going to kill the Creator's son. They hate him for it, and they go after him. Friends, this is the story of Holy Week. Keep reading, immerse yourself in this stuff. It is all important. All right? We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye.